Up for you, we've got several YouTube clips, a ton of news stories, many interesting issues to cover. Obviously, I'm in Austin, Texas for the first time since 2005, my first time in Austin for 9 years now. And one of the big stories that we're going to cover actually sprung out of me simply traveling through the airport and buying a copy of Foreign Affairs, which is right here, which of course is the CFR's publication, which, as Hillary Clinton and others have admitted, basically runs the State Department of the United States. And this is particularly interesting because they have basically 3 or 4 articles. They devote half of the magazine to what they call the American distemper, the land of decay and dysfunction. And the primary article that we're going to cover exemplifies how the elites are in a panic about the populist uprising, both in the United States with the Tea Party and in Europe with the UK Independence Party and the numerous other factions across the European Union that are rebelling against the establishment. The key quotes out of the article, which we're going to read through, we're going to analyse, exemplify again how the elite are completely in a blind panic about the populist uprising that goes against the state system, the monopoly system that the globalists are trying to establish both across America and Europe, with what we see now in 2016 with Hillary Clinton going up against Rand Paul in all likelihood. And they say directly that they need to, quote, co-opt the populist uprising to kind of send this off into a rabbit hole, to acknowledge the fact that people have got these concerns about national identity, about the general decline in living standards, and that they need to hijack that that feeling of disenfranchisement that is sweeping America and sweeping Europe, and send that off into a rabbit hole where it's acknowledged, so it's kind of diffused into elements of political engagement, which never really achieves what the UK Independence Party, what the Tea Party in the United States of America are trying to accomplish. So we're going to cover that. That is really a huge issue because the elite are talking about it. Again, they know that most people don't buy Foreign Affairs because it's $9.95 to buy. It's a magazine, basically, you know, $15, $16 in the US. So the elite are reading this. The normal, average, working class, middle people aren't reading this, and yet it's the game plan for what they see across Europe and across America in the next couple of years. We've also got David Cameron coming up. He did a big UN speech a couple of days ago talking about how anyone who questions the official government narrative about 7/7 or about 9/11 is basically is as dangerous as an ISIS terrorist. Amazing clip that we've got coming up. You have to hear what David Cameron said in front of the United Nations just 2 or 3 days ago. And again, how it ties into how they're characterizing any questioning of the government narrative on ISIS, which, as we have documented with the recent spate of beheading videos, is extremely suspicious, extremely questionable. They're very concerned about that. So we're going to cover that. We're going to cover the Saudis saying that the true agenda behind the attack on ISIS in Syria, in Iraq, is about overthrowing Assad, regime change in Syria. We've got David Knight in studio to cover some more key issues. This is going to be a great show. Stay tuned. We've got numerous YouTube clips coming up. Your calls coming later. This is The Alex Jones Show, Infowars.com. Stay right there.
Using unparalleled research in the development of a synergistic formulation based around the key concepts of superoxygenation, the next level in cleansing is here. With key ingredients backed by real clinical studies, the new Oxy Powder, available through InfoWars Life, was invented during Dr. Group's research on the toxification of our bodies. Many herbal colon cleansers are harsh on the body and contain cheap and potentially dangerous ingredients, oftentimes full of synthetic fillers, GMOs, additives, or worse. works. Gently start cleaning your body with easy capsules that start working while you sleep. Oxy Powder does not require time off work, and there's no need for bad-tasting concoctions. Instead, Oxy Powder slowly releases monoatomic oxygen into the intestinal tract and body. Experience the astonishing cleansing power of superoxide and ozonide technology. Go to InfoWarsLife.com or InfoWarsStore.com to get started with Oxy Powder, or call 1-888-253-3139.
Fitting that a free screen should sound the alarm against those who would destroy freedom. For in its power to deceive and inflame, or enlighten and inspire, the motion picture has no equal.
This is the Alex Jones Show, the Sunday edition. I'm Paul Joseph Watson, filling in for Alex Jones. Riding shotgun is David Knight with some key stories about the Tokyo eruption. 160 miles west of Tokyo, we had this major volcanic eruption. And, of course, the Hong Kong protests, which have been raging over the past couple of days against the imposition of Chinese influence on Hong Kong. David Knight, tell us about what's coming up.
Well, yeah, we've got a lot of eruptions. We've got freedom eruption in Hong Kong as well as Catalonia. That's exactly what you were just talking about in the first segment, about how foreign affairs is concerned about people waking up. When we see the independence movements and the desire for people to have more say-so about government, to have more input into what's going to be done in their lives, we see that in Hong Kong, Beijing is saying they want to vet all the political candidates for their elections. So they're saying basically, you can have the elections. We're just going to pick which candidates you can choose from. Now, they do that in the United States and the UK, but they're a lot more subtle about it. So when they got into people's faces there, Hong Kong was agreed to be a separate autonomous region, but it looks like they don't have that much autonomy. And we see the same thing happening in Catalonia, where people are asking for a referendum. Actually, they have scheduled it, even though Spain is saying that's not constitutional. We're not going to allow that. The position of the Spanish government is really pretty amazing if you stop and think about it. Unlike the Scottish referendum that they just had in the UK, they're saying that all of Spain needs to vote on this referendum as to whether or not the Catalonians will be allowed to leave or not. So it'd be like saying, no, we're not going to have that election unless England and Wales and everybody else gets to vote on that. And actually, Catalonia has been a separate area for quite some time culturally, linguistically. Yeah. It's a very vital economic region. They believe that they can go it on their own, just like a lot of people in Texas believe we could go it on our own if given half a chance. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. That's going to be coming up right after our elections. And what changed was yesterday, the prime minister there, I believe is his title, Artur Mas, said he scheduled the referendum after the parliament overwhelmingly said that they wanted to give a referendum out. But of course, the Spanish government is saying that's not going to happen. But there's a lot of violence in Hong Kong. These peaceful protests have now turned into clashes with the police. They've had 34 people injured there. And then, of course, in Japan, there was a volcanic eruption yesterday. The interesting thing about this, and of course, Paul, I've been on vacation. I was up in Yellowstone, so I spent the last couple of weeks walking around on top of a giant volcano, the largest one on Earth, which is
very brave.
Well, you never know when any of these things are going to happen. It's just like driving down the road. But they're telling us that we're not seeing the kind of movements, seismic movements, the kind of ground swelling and temperatures that they would anticipate in the buildup to a Yellowstone eruption. Right. However, they didn't see anything with this Ontake volcano. It caught them completely by surprise. It had people, they had one lady who was on top of, or one individual who was on top of the mountain taking a picture of the top of the caldera and tweeting it out just moments before it blew.
And this killed 30 people, did it?
So far, yeah, the death toll is mounting. They found 30 people near the summit that are dead, but they've taken a lot of people back that were suffering from respiratory problems from the ash, also from poisonous gas for the people that were near the top. So everybody was hiking and climbing on this. They'd had a little bit of volcanic activity, but that's not unusual in any of these areas. You're constantly going to be having very small earthquakes. It was nothing that raised an alarm with any of the volcanologists that were there, the geologists. nothing was put out. It just popped. Now, the interesting thing about Yellowstone, I'm going to do a special report on this, is that we had research papers that came out at the beginning of this year, January 5th, 2 different research papers done independently. Both of them said that supervolcanoes were far more unpredictable than normal volcanoes, that they could just explode based on the buoyancy of the magma dome. And of course, about the same time, we learned that Yellowstone's magma dome is 2.5 times larger than they believed before, and they already believed it was the largest in the world. So that is a very troubling sign that you're not going to have these kinds of seismic shifts that are typically felt as earthquakes that usually precede a volcanic eruption. If you remember back to 1980, Mount St. Helens, people had a couple of months warning before that blew. Still, you had 60 people die. Similar thing about a decade later with Mount Pinatubo. About 900 people died, even though they had evacuated tens of thousands of people. They were still surprised by the magnitude of the earthquake, and of course they can't predict the timing, but they did have a lot of warning with that earthquake as well. This one in Japan today, no warning whatsoever. It just popped.
That is amazing, because I remember probably about 6 months ago now, I did a video about buffalo, wild buffalo, running away from Yellowstone volcano, and that was kind of dismissed at the time as, you know, we would have so far advance warning if anything was about to happen at Yellowstone that, you know, people would get really in advance warning to get away from the area. But as you say, with this this volcano near Tokyo, 160 miles west of Tokyo, there was basically no warning whatsoever. So that suggests that the systems that they've got in place now are not sufficient to give people that kind of heads up.
It's not that well understood. And there was a lot of debunking about that movement of the bison there. I've been to Yellowstone many times, and every time I've gone, I've not seen any buffalo running. I mean, they're very passive, very docile. They just want to eat most of the time. They will get moving, and of course they say, you know, that could have been what was happening there. Yeah. It's a very large movement of a very large number of buffalo, which made it look suspicious. But there were other things that happened at the same time. They had the largest earthquake in 30 years in April. In July, they had a road that melted, turned to soup. It was reported by a Yellowstone spokesman. Right. And the first person that I talked to there, the first ranger, basically downplayed that, said it was just a bad asphalt job, and it was a summer. I hadn't been to Firehole Lake Drive at the time I talked to her. I would have called her on that. But I do talk about it in the special report that I'm putting together. That was an area that had a lot of geothermal activity. And 2 months later, you can still see that that road is pretty messed up. And it's messed up in the areas where the geothermal features intersect with the road or come in close proximity to it. So I don't think that that's, you know, there's plenty of evidence that that happens all the time in Yellowstone. And of course, they've had much larger earthquakes, other things that have happened in terms of ground risings. But it does look like, according to the USGS, that they are coming into a period of increased activity and uplift in that area. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to pop. They don't know when it's going to pop, is the point of the new research, just like they didn't know when this conventional volcano was going to pop. And they have a completely different mechanism. When it happens, of course, as we've talked about, it will be a huge event for the entire planet. It will be orders of magnitude worse than anything that Al Gore has imagined with global warming. So it's going to be an interesting report. So I'll have that out the next day or so.
Okay, and going back to the Catalonia thing, of course, as far as I understand it, in that region, their economy has prospered more than the rest of Spain. So, as you mentioned, they're talking about giving the whole of Spain the vote. They've got a 25% or more unemployment rate, mainly as a result of this green economy, disastrous policy that's been imposed on Spain. But as far as I understand it, Catalonia has, in comparison, prospered. So that's one of the main reasons why they're trying to secede from the rest of Spain, because their local economy has engendered quite a prosperous environment in the past few years. So I think that's, again, we talk about these individual states, these individual countries rebelling against the main, like Scotland, rebelling against